Hello, this is BBC News. I'm Lewis Vaughan Jones with the latest headlines. As the Chancellor prepares to make his spring statement, new figures show the cost of living has risen by more than 6%, the fastest increase in over 30 years. Rishi Sunak is under pressure to promise more help for struggling families as many face soaring energy, fuel and food costs.
I used to love going to the beach, but I can't even afford that in fuel now, because I have got a car to run as well. So we just do little things like this now. Sometimes we'll even get bus, won't we, instead.
In Ukraine, new aerial images emerge of the battered city of Mariupol. President Zelensky says more than 100,000 civilians remain there without food, water or medicine. 2 years on from the first coronavirus lockdown, events are held across the UK to remember lives lost and sacrifices made during the pandemic. And the women's world number one, Australia's Ash Barty, says she's hanging up her tennis racket at just 25 years old. Good morning, welcome to the programme. First, the Chancellor Rishi Sunak will unveil his spring statement in the Commons later today as the country faces increasing pressure from rising energy, fuel and food costs. It comes as official figures released this morning show the cost of living continued to soar last month. Prices rose by 6.2% in the 12 months to February, the fastest for 30 years. The figures lay bare the challenge the Chancellor faces ahead of his spring spending statement. Sunak faces growing calls to offer more support as household budgets are squeezed. So, what new measures might he consider? Let's take a look. There is speculation the Chancellor could cut fuel duty by 5p per litre. Also been calls for him to delay a planned rise in national insurance payments or scrap it altogether. But it's possible that he might instead raise the threshold at which people start paying. And next month, the government will increase benefits, including universal credit, by 3.1%. But dozens of charities want the Chancellor to go further. Our Consumer Affairs correspondent, Coletta Smith, has this.
The Chancellor has been rehearsing, but the audience that really matters are a long way from Westminster. He's under pressure to announce something to help shade us from the scorching cost of every bill at the moment. It's a gorgeous day and everyone's making the most of the sunshine.
This is my little boy Tiger.
Oh, hello.
We're just trying to do more like this, like go out on days out like this. I used to love going to the beach, but I can't even afford that in fuel now, because I have got a car to run as well. So we just do little things like this now. Sometimes we'll even get bus, won't we, instead.
Stevie's rent went up by £200 last month and she's already behind on the gas and electricity bills.
We're just trying to get by, just try and keep upbeat about it anyway.
Paul and Charlotte have been feeling the bite of energy bills this winter too.
The gas goes on, it takes a while to kick in. So,
and perhaps back in the day when we were students, we would have not put the heating on, but we can't do that anymore because we've got Lewis. So we've been to Eureka this morning, using our Tesco vouchers. So it was free because of the Tesco vouchers, but it's just like all of those things when you're planning, you're just trying to save costs wherever you can.
Morning. All right, you?
Costs are rising for Mark at his coffee shop, but he doesn't want to put prices up because he knows how tough everyone's finding it.
We do have to pay a wage, pay ourselves, pay your rent. It all has a huge impact. And to keep that quality experience going, people might have to pay that extra pound to enjoy it.
But that's something Stevie just can't afford.
I don't think I'd be able to save £1.
Yeah, so you're literally living, everything
month by
that comes
month,
in just gets spent?
Straight out, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if you can't meet those bills, then where will you turn?
I either don't pay them and then it's debt, or I don't really want to ask family, but I do.
Today's spring statement isn't supposed to be a full budget, but just tinkering around the edges isn't going to be enough to help Stevie and millions like her. Coletta Smith, BBC News, at the Peace Hall in Halifax.
Right, we can speak now to Richard Walker, who is the Managing Director of Iceland Food Group. Thank you very much for coming on the programme.
Hi, good morning.
So we've heard just there, cost of food, a huge issue at the moment. How are you finding it?
Yeah, look, I think it's safe to say the cost of living crisis is the single most important issue domestically facing us at the moment, and it is very difficult because it's systemic throughout the supply chain. We've got commodity price pressures because of the oil price, so the cost of a good is going up, but we have supplier price increases because of fuel, labour shortages, lack of inputs such as fertilizer and wheat, for example, from Ukraine and Russia. And then we have operational cost pressures throughout our business, minimum wage, green taxation, national insurance, electricity bills. It's the perfect storm, really, and that is starting to affect prices because business is not some endless sponge that can forever absorb these costs. And that's why we are, unfortunately, as are all of our competitors, having to pass some of it on to consumers.
And yeah, just give us a rough idea of that. You are having to increase prices. Give us a rough idea by how much.
Well, it's very different across the board. You know, some prices haven't gone up. Obviously, we work day and night to be as competitive as possible. But then, you know, if you look at bread, that's probably gone up 10%, bacon, 10 to 15%. You've got things like milk, which have gone up, you know, 20% plus. It very much depends on what it is, where it's produced, how it's produced, etc.
And this is the real figures that really matter for people on lower incomes, isn't it? Because we've been reporting today the increase 6% or so in inflation. But actually, if you're spending a large portion of your budget on things like milk and bread, and that's gone up by a lot more, you're going to be a lot more impacted.
Yeah, that's right, because you don't have cash to go around in the first place. And I think the phrases like the choice between heating and eating sound dramatic, but it's absolutely true for some of our customers. I mean, we're being told some pretty bleak things at the moment from our most deprived communities. Some food bank users, for example, are declining potatoes and root veg because they can't afford the energy to boil them. So it absolutely, you know, is a big issue. We're doing everything we can as a business, freezing our £1 lines. We have different kind of innovative things that we're doing, but also the government does need to support business as well as consumers, because by supporting business, in turn, that helps consumers.
Yeah, well, just that sentence you just said then was pretty stark. That will stick in the memory. People are refusing potatoes because they can't afford to boil the water for them. Let's move on to the business side. Now, what help would you like from government?
I think if you look at bricks and mortar retailers such as ourselves, we have a big online option, but we do have 1,000 stores physically, and you know we are disproportionately hit by things like energy increases. So as a first step, I think the consumer price cap should be extended to businesses as well, if at all possible, because we're seeing a many multi-fold increase in our price of electricity. For example, next year there's no cap on the wholesale markets. Potentially that could be paid for by a windfall tax from the excessive profits from the energy companies. Other things, we calculated a temporary reduction of VAT down to 5% would be worth 100 million to consumers, because we pass every penny of saving on to them. And then maybe we need to look at the sequencing of some of the new taxes that are coming in, that are right to come in, but are at the same time as everything else. So things like the green taxation, which will cost us 16 million next year. I'm a big environmentalist, wrote a book on it, but I think we need to look at maybe temporarily pausing it whilst we have this cost of living crisis, and of course the national insurance increase, which everyone has been talking about as well.
Well, that's quite a long list of potential measures. We'll keep an eye out. We'll know in a couple of hours which of those come in or don't. Just finally, I'm going to ask you a slightly unfair question, but I know people at home watching who shop, go out to the high street and use your shops. Can you give any idea about when prices will start coming back under to what they normally expect?
I think some of the pressures, if you think of wheat from Ukraine, sunflower oil, is hopefully a relatively short-term issue. And obviously we all hope and pray that issue is resolved as quickly as possible. I think some is maybe more systemic, and we may have to get used to a future with slightly higher food prices. That's the reality. I don't think that this is a temporary blip that's going to come all the way back down. I mean, that's the reality. And you could say that food has been too cheap for too long, because prices haven't really moved over the last 25 years. But of course, what's happening now is excessive. So we very much hope it does cool off a bit in the second half of the year.
Fascinating to get your thoughts. Richard Walker, Managing Director of Iceland. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, let's talk to our political correspondent, Jonathan Blake, who is in Downing Street, where Cabinet are due to meet in the next few minutes or so. And of course, the Chancellor will be leaving from number 11 this morning as well. Jonathan, good to see you. So we heard a long list there of potential things that the Chancellor could do. What's your thoughts on what the Chancellor will do?
Well, the big question is this morning, will the measures that the Chancellor announces in his spring statement later on match the expectations of MPs in his own party, who are only too aware of the squeeze so many households are feeling at the moment, given the emails and letters they'll have been getting from constituents, the pressure from trade unions, from businesses, and of course the calls from opposition parties to cut taxes and introduce measures to help households who are struggling. I think the most likely things that we will see from the Chancellor later on today, so far as we can know what he's going to announce, will be a possible cut in fuel duty. That is something which the Chancellor and ministers have not pushed back particularly hard on. So the question will be, if that comes in, how much will duty be cut on fuel? Then there is the issue of national insurance contributions. That's a tax rise which is due to come in April, and as ministers arrive for the Cabinet meeting this morning, that's Suella Braverman there, the Attorney General, going in. They'll be getting a sneak preview of what the Chancellor is going to say to MPs later on, and it is that national insurance rise due to come in April that there's also a lot of focus on. The chances of it being scrapped, the chances of it being delayed, I think are very, very slim, given that the Chancellor and the Prime Minister are both committed to pushing it through and continuing with it. But will there be some tweaking around the edges? Will the threshold at which people start paying national insurance rise, meaning that those on lower incomes would be protected from that increase to a certain extent for a little longer? We'll have to see what the Chancellor has to say later on. And then there are some other measures which his own MPs and others would like to see. Will there be a rise in universal credit payments? Will taxes on energy change, particularly what's known as the green levies, which pay for investment in renewable energy? Will they be changed at all? And will we see a change in VAT? Those probably less likely. And we should remember that this is not a budget, it's not a huge economic moment. The spring statement is normally an update for the Chancellor to give on the state of the economy, with one or two measures announced around the edges. But such are the circumstances this year around this spring statement that expectations are so incredibly high on the Chancellor to put in place some measures to mitigate the impacts of rising bills, inflation more generally, and of course that's been exacerbated by the war in Ukraine more recently.
Jonathan, thank you for resisting the urge to shout questions at Cabinet Ministers. You saved all our eardrums there by shouting directly into your microphone, so thank you for that. Just want to pick up on that technicality almost that you mentioned at the end there, that this isn't an all singing, all dancing budget, that it would normally be a slightly drier affair, a kind of economic forecast. Just reinforces there how extreme the situation is right now.
Yes, and there has been pressure for some time for the Chancellor and for the government to intervene and to announce measures to ease the for what for many people is a cost of living crisis at the moment, which is only going to get worse in the weeks and months to come. And it is going to get harder, in part at least, because of that looming tax rise, the national insurance increase taking effect next month, which has already, of course, been announced and confirmed by the Chancellor. But yes, these are extraordinary economic times, and doing nothing is not really politically or economically an option for the Chancellor. So there is huge pressure and very high expectation on him to intervene and to try to ease the pressure. But it's a case of how far he's willing to go. Last weekend, he did say that he would step in and the government would, where possible, make things a little easier for people if it could. But he's only got limited means at his disposal, given that he said he doesn't want to continue borrowing vast sums of money that we saw the government do during the pandemic to simply keep the economy going, given his aspiration and his stated aim to cut taxes. He says that he believes in cutting taxes, but there's been very little evidence so far during his term in office that that has been his first instinct. when he is presented with the option to do so. Now, of course, the conditions have dictated that to a large extent. There has been the pandemic, there has been the resulting recession, and now there is the war in Ukraine and the rising prices generally across the board, which have come with that. So what will he do? We only have a couple of hours now to wait and find out.
Indeed. Thanks for that, Jonathan. Jonathan Blake there in Downing Street, and we're expecting to hear from the Chancellor giving that statement at about 12:30. Right, let's get a bit more now on the impact for people and businesses. Our business correspondent Nina Warhurst is at a wholesale market in Liverpool.
Inflation hitting 6.2%. Well, that hasn't come as a massive surprise to traders here in Liverpool. Take one of the products, this pineapple that's come from Costa Rica. Think about all the fuel, the energy that's been used to get it here. Along the way, the prices have been going up. On top of that, that shortage of HGV drivers, that's been increasing their wages. Just two little bits of that inflationary pressure. And Ian, you're feeling it across the board.
Absolutely.
Tell me about your tomatoes.
Well, similar to the pineapples coming from Costa Rica, these are coming from Morocco and Spain, 1,500-mile journey. We've had a driver strike in Spain, which has impacted on the supply line. So it's a proper supply and demand situation. It's pushed the price up from £8 last week to £16 this week, and it's still rising. We're still struggling to get hold of more.
So what will we hear from the Chancellor later on today? There are a few options. So we hear, don't we, that fuel prices might be coming down marginally, about 5p per litre, but that would only help you each time you fill up at the tank by about £2 to £3. Maybe then he'll delay or increase the threshold at which we pay more national insurance, although he's ruled that out earlier this week. What about then increasing universal credit then for the poorest households? That's something that Labour has been advocating, for example. Miata, which of those measures, you're an economic analyst, do you think were most important at the moment?
I think for me, boosting incomes for people at low and modest incomes. So big uprating in universal credit. I want to see about a £15 billion cash boost. That would have a massive impact on families who are at the sharp end of this cost of living crisis.
The Treasury would argue, we see that, we hear you, we're giving £350 to most households, albeit part of that in a loan. There's the warm home discount, for example. We're increasing national insurance, but that's to pay for the NHS. You know, they say there are these measures in place.
And I say you haven't done enough. You know, the price rises that we're seeing are absolutely extraordinary, and they need to do more. When you take all the measures they've put in place, the analysis that we've done at the New Economics Foundation says that actually all households are still worse off. The bottom 10% of households, £420 worse off. It is painful. There's a squeeze out there. He's got to do more.
The warning from the Chancellor, though, thank you, is that we can't do much more. There are these support measures in place. It won't be like the pandemic, where we put those extraordinary extra measures in place. So one thing we can say at lunchtime is don't be surprised if there aren't many surprises in the spring statement.
Thanks to Nina for that. Right, let's speak to Mel Stride, Conservative MP and Chair of the Treasury Committee. Thanks very much for coming on the programme.
Pleasure.
Now, your committee has released a report on the impact on the economic sanctions on Russia, which I will come on to in a little bit. And actually, what I'm going to talk about first is related to this. But I want to talk about the Chancellor's spring statement today. We've heard there are lots of ways in which different people and different businesses are struggling at the moment. What would you like to see happen?
Well, I think as your last clip suggested, what the Chancellor has got to do now is focus targeted support on low-income households, because they are the households where fuel and food prices are going to represent a higher proportion of their spending than those that are better off. And of course, these are the same people who, unfortunately, during the pandemic have not been able to save as much as many others in the economy. So it's got to be targeted support, but he's going to have to balance that against meeting his fiscal targets and also being concerned about what the future might hold for the economy in terms of inflation and interest rates and all those other costs that are going to bear down on government.
OK, well, looking at that idea of targeted support, an increase in national insurance, a tax on jobs, according to businesses, tax on people of all incomes, but including lower incomes. What do you make of that?
I think it should be scrapped, and there's been a position I personally held for some time now. Now is not the time to go ahead with this. The so-called wiggle room that everybody talks about, which is the kind of headroom that the Chancellor has between the targets that he's set and where the economy is at the moment, does allow him to scrap that tax increase altogether and at the same time still meet his commitment to fund extra funds for the NHS and social care. It can be done, and I think now is the time for him to do it.
He will probably respond and saying, well, it can't be done. There isn't enough money. We've got to fund health and social care in some way.
Well, absolutely, but it's not an either or. What has happened is the economy has bounced back rather more quickly than the forecasters expected. Inflation itself has driven up the tax take because more people are being pushed into higher levels of tax as a consequence of that, because the Chancellor froze the income tax thresholds. And so that's an effect of that. So there is more money. It is possible to actually do both, keep the money going to the NHS and scrap that tax. Now, what I think he'll do is probably, as has been suggested on your programme, is actually just raise the threshold of national insurance. Now, that will be helpful because it will indeed be targeted at the less well off.
And just moving on to more of the area of your report, the impact of sanctions on Russia. Now, just to be clear, inflation and the cost of living was ramping up well before this. But what extra impact do you think it will have on ordinary people up and down the country as these sanctions and the effects of the Russia-Ukraine conflict hit?
Well, it will be unhelpful because clearly it's going to lead to, and is already leading to, an increase in gas and oil prices. It will also directly affect the price of food, both through the increase in the energy costs, but also because Ukraine in particular, as a result of this war, is not going to be able to produce the kind of wheat output and other outputs that make it the breadbasket of Europe. So these are going to be very serious effects. One shouldn't overlook, though, the punishing effect of these sanctions on the Putin regime and on Russia. I mean, we've seen the ruble slip very strongly. Inflation is now taking off very rapidly at over 2% a week at the moment. That's huge compared to what we're facing. And so they're in for a very, very tough time ahead. And this is all part of putting the pressure on Putin for the terrible things that he is now doing in the Ukraine.
OK, we must leave it there. Mel Stride, MP, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right, with me now is the Policy Director for Child Action Poverty Group, Sarah Ogilvie. Thanks very much for coming on the programme. So we've heard a range of ways in which the cost of living is affecting different people, businesses. What's the main ways, what are the pinch points here for children and for families?
I mean, the thing about children is they cost money, don't they? They need food, they need to eat, they need to get dropped off at things on days like today. You know, in London it's super sunny, so you need sun cream or you need to find their hats, and perhaps that means going out and buying a new one for them. So the main thing is that, you know, it's not just one pinch point really, it's that prices are reaching this kind of all-time high, so families' costs are shooting right up. And what we're hearing from families is that they just don't have anything left to cut back on, really. So lots of them faced a cut to their benefits before Christmas, and before that they had COVID, so as you're hearing, people just haven't been able to save any money. And actually for quite a long time benefits have been cut and freezed, even, you know, before COVID. So we've kind of had 10 years of families really struggling to keep up with the amount of money they need to look after their children and to give their children everything that they need to get by properly.
And so what are some of the most effective or the most targeted ways in which you think the government, the Chancellor, should help?
I think what the Chancellor really needs to do today is show that he understands the scale of the challenge that families are facing. And what he did a few months ago, as we heard in some of your other clips, was, you know, there were some smaller measures that he introduced and they just didn't do enough. So what we're calling for is a rise in benefits to match inflation, which is around 8% at the moment. And what government is currently committed to is raising it by 3%. That leaves families with just a huge gap in their budget. We've calculated that it'll probably leave them with about 660 quid short every year, and that's just not something that they can absorb at the moment. So really, the Chancellor has got to really recognise the reality that families are facing, and frankly, anything less will just not be good enough.
So that's the one point for you, the main priority, that rise in benefits in line with inflation. What else would you want?
I mean, that's our main thing, but I mean, over the longer term, you know, we need to really look at the adequacy of benefits and how families have got into the situation that they're in at the moment. So one way you could look at this is that it is just kind of lots of short crises that families are facing, but actually, you know, we've got this current crisis, it's going to last all year. Before that, we had COVID. So really, there's something much more fundamental that is going on with our economy and the way that things are balanced. And really, if the Chancellor could look at the reality of families' lives and look at what children need and what what their families need to get by. I think a much more fundamental look at how much families are getting in benefits and how our services work. Things like free school meals would make a huge difference to families. So there's lots of different things that are being talked about today, but if you're looking at the measures to be targeted at families the most in need, that's the kind of stuff we need.
Sarah Ogilvie, absolutely fascinating. Thank you very much for outlining exactly what you would like to see the Chancellor doing from the Child Poverty Action Group Policy Director. Thank you. Right, well, let's take a look at 11 Downing Street, because we had lots of questions then, lots of potential measures that could be taken, and in not long at all, we will find out what measures the Chancellor will sign up to. We're expecting, just to mark your card, the order of play, as it were, Cabinet meeting in Downing Street at 9:30, so about now-ish, and then we're expecting Rishi Sunak about an hour after that to leave 11 Downing Street there. The short trip to Parliament. We'll have Prime Minister's question times at midday, and then at 12:30 the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, will deliver the spring statement, and we will get some of those answers at that time. Right, we're going to leave the spring statement there for a bit and head to Ukraine now. President Volodymyr Zelensky says there is nothing left of the port city of Mariupol as it remains under constant Russian bombardment. In his nightly address, he said 100,000 civilians remain there with no food, water or medicine. Judith Moritz reports.
The road out of Mariupol is the road out of hell. It's a desperate journey, but car after car has run this gauntlet, fleeing a city where there's almost nothing left. And what can life possibly feel like for those still there? The Russians have razed this place to the ground. Thousands are still trapped, trying to survive in impossible circumstances.
As of today, there are about 100,000 people in the city in inhuman conditions, completely blockaded, without food, without water, without medicines, subject to constant shelling, constant bombardment. For more than a week now, we've been trying to organise stable humanitarian corridors for Mariupol residents. And almost all our attempts, unfortunately, are disrupted by the Russian occupiers, by shelling or deliberate terror.
As Russian tanks continue to roll across Ukrainian territory, there are pockets of resistance. This is the town of Vozhnesensk. The Russians were determined to seize it, but this quiet farming community stood its ground, setting a trap for the invading soldiers, and then blowing up the town's bridge, sending the Russians into retreat. In places like this, the Ukrainians are moving from defence to attack.
We have seen indications that the Ukrainians are going a bit more on the offense now. They have been defending very smartly, very nimbly, very creatively in places that they believe are the right places to defend. And we have seen them now in places, particularly in the south, near Kherson. They have tried to regain territory.
The Ukrainians say that each day they fight, they buy themselves a better position at the negotiating table. The diplomacy continues, but so too does the war of words. Russia has refused to rule out using nuclear weapons. The Pentagon called those remarks dangerous. And with further sanctions imminent, the Ukrainians hope that step by step, the Russians will be urged towards peace. Judith Moritz, BBC News.
And we'll have plenty more from Ukraine, of course. And a quick pointer, though, we'll be taking your questions on the war in Ukraine this Friday at 11:30. We'll have guests able to answer a range of aspects of the war, from how it's being fought, how it's being reported, and how it may end. And, of course, the human consequences, too. You can get in touch on Twitter using the hashtag BBC Your Questions, and you can email us on yourquestions@bbc.co.uk. Now, P&O Ferries has said 800 staff they made redundant will be offered £36.5 million compensation in total, with around 40 people getting more than £100,000 each. The firm has also denied that it broke the law when it sacked the workers without warning last week. However, unions said the compensation package being offered was pure blackmail and threats. Let's turn to COVID now. Today marks 2 years since the Prime Minister announced the UK's first official lockdown, telling the country you must stay at home. Since then, nearly 164,000 people have died with COVID-19. A memorial concert is being held at St Paul's Cathedral this morning. Our health correspondent Catherine Burns is there. Hi Catherine, so how will people be marking today?
Morning. You know, it's exactly 2 years since the bells rang silent here at St Paul's, because that is when the Prime Minister spoke to the nation and put us into lockdown. Now, he talked for 6 minutes, but really it could be summed up with that one instruction: you must stay at home. No meeting friends, no families, nothing other than essentials, because we had no treatment and we had no vaccine. Now we're in a very different position because we have both. It's all about living with COVID. Even so, there's still almost 300 people on ventilators right now with COVID. And as you say, we've lost 164,000 people almost within 28 days of a positive COVID test. So this concert tonight is about remembering those people and also paying special tribute to the NHS staff and care workers who worked so hard during the pandemic. Now, no cameras are allowed inside. I have had a sneak peek and it's looking absolutely beautiful. I'm joined now by someone who can tell us all about it, Andrew Carwood, the Director of Music. What should we be expecting at this concert?
Well, good morning. I think what you're going to get is an amazing emotional experience, because you've got this great building, which, as you said, is looking terrific. You've got a choir, the London Symphony Chorus, we've got the City London Symphonia, we have the Rambert Dance Company, we have the Cathedral Choir. We're all going to be performing music of real power, talking about resilience, talking about love, talking about loss. And it's all going to be in the context, particularly of the NHS workers who've lost their lives by looking after so many during the pandemic.
And you said during one piece, the names of all the NHS workers who died is going to be sung out. Will you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so this is Howard Goodall's piece. It's a really powerful thing because, you know, singing gives expression to words in a different way. You're not just saying it, but singing it. It's so powerful. And in his piece, the names of those who've died in the NHS are going to be recited, and some of their families are going to be there. So it's going to be a really emotional, powerful event.
And what's your role going to be?
Well, I'm conducting the Cathedral Choir. We're not singing in Howard's piece, we're doing some music by Sir Michael Tippett, by Sir John Tavener, and this is really, again, really emotional stuff. It talks about resilience. There's some spirituals that we're singing about, you know, believing strongly that everything's going to be all right. And John Tavener's piece is unbelievably serene, looking towards the light, looking towards hope.
So when you're not conducting, you're going to be sitting in this service. You know, these moments, they're such a time to sort of sit and take stock, aren't they? What are you going to be remembering from the last 2 years?
Well, it's difficult, isn't it? I mean, I've got lots of people to think about. But I think for me personally, it was not being able to sing. Because being a singer and someone who conducts singers, when literally the whole world fell silent, it was absolutely devastating. And as I said, you know, the music gives an extra dimension to our experience, and not to be able to express that was really difficult.
Well, best of luck for that tonight. Now, all the tickets for the concert are sold out, but it can be live streamed. That's at 7 o'clock tonight if you want to catch that.
Thanks very much, Catherine. Right, now it's time for a look at the weather with Carol. Hi, Carol. Things still looking good?
They are indeed, Lewis. Yes, good morning, everybody. It's been a chilly start to the day, but for most of us, it's going to be dry, sunny and warm. That is when we get rid of what's left of the fog across northeast England and the East Midlands. So a lot of sunshine around, the chance of a shower, eastern England, eastern Scotland and later western Scotland, with our temperature range 9 to 19 degrees. But we could well see a 21 somewhere in East Anglia or the southeast, and always that bit cooler along the coast. Now, through this evening and overnight, under clear skies, the temperature will fall away. We'll see some patchy mist and fog form, and a bit more cloud coming in across Northern Ireland and Western Scotland could produce a shower or two. These are overnight lows in towns and cities, but lower than that in the countryside with a touch of frost. So tomorrow, any mist and fog are lifting quite rapidly. Again, a lot of sunshine, still a bit more cloudy, especially in Western Scotland and the west of Northern Ireland with the odd shower. Temperatures 9 to about 18 degrees, but again, cooler on the coasts.
Hello, this is BBC News. I'm Lewis Vaughan Jones. The headlines. As the Chancellor prepares to make his spring statement, new figures show the cost of living has risen by more than 6%, the fastest increase in over 30 years. In Ukraine, new aerial images emerge of the battered city of Mariupol. President Zelensky says more than 100,000 civilians remain there without food, water or medicine. 2 years on from the first coronavirus lockdown, events are held across the UK to remember lives lost and sacrifices made during the pandemic. And the women's world #1, Australia's Ash Barty, says she's hanging up her tennis racket at just 25 years old. Right, let's get more on that and the rest of the day's sport. Hi, Chetan.
Hi, Lewis. Thank you. Good morning. Yes, we are going to start with Ash Barty. Where else to start this morning but with her? That shock announcement that she is retiring from tennis at the age of just 25. As she made the announcement on social media earlier, saying she's leaving to chase other dreams. And that after winning Wimbledon last year. She's remained the top-ranked player in the world. And in January, of course, just became the first home player to win the Australian Open singles title in 44 years. This is some of what she's been saying on social media.
I'll be retiring from tennis, and it's the first time I've actually said it out loud, and yeah, it's hard to say, but I'm so happy and I'm so ready, and I just know at the moment in my heart for me as a person, this is right. And I know I've done this before, but in a very different feeling. And I'm so grateful to everything that tennis has given me.
Tennis players trying to wrap their heads around the news. This is Simona Halep, the former Wimbledon champion, saying, Ash, what can I say? You know, I have tears, right? My friend, I will miss you on tour. You were different and special, and we shared some amazing moments. What's next for you? Grand Slam champion in golf. Be happy and enjoy your life to the max. Simona. This from Madison Keys on Twitter, an incredible tennis player, but more importantly, one of the nicest people on tour. Congratulations on an amazing career and good luck with what's next. And Andy Murray on Twitter, simple but powerful, happy for you, gutted for tennis, what a player, heart emoji. Well, earlier, former British #1 Annabel Croft gave me her thoughts on Barty's shock announcement.
I think the whole of the tennis world were in complete shock. I mean, I didn't see this coming. I don't think anyone saw it coming. But then when you hear what she has to say about it, and you hear that she really feels like she has nothing left to give, that, by winning at the Australian Open, it was just like the final fantastic achievement that she wanted to achieve. And she just doesn't have anything left. So I think it all makes perfect sense.
More reaction and analysis to that story over on the BBC Sport website. Just want to bring you one line of football news. Manchester United have officially spoken to Ajax coach Erik ten Hag about their vacant manager's job. BBC Sport understands the meeting took place on Monday. United beginning now to crystallise their thoughts around the future interim boss on it too. That is all your sport for now. We'll have more for you later, but for now, back to you, Lewis.
Thanks, Chetan. Right, let's return to our top story now. There's further pressure on the Chancellor Rishi Sunak to tackle the soaring cost of living in his spring statement today, after new figures revealed a bigger than expected jump in inflation. Well, let's take a closer look at the figures. Here's our economics correspondent, Andy Verity. Hi, Andy. So can you talk us through what's going on here?
Yeah, sure, Lewis. The inflation story, as you mentioned, is, of course, the big story here. And if you look at a chart of what's happened to inflation over the last 10 years, you can see that it's got up higher than it has for a decade. And in fact, it's the highest for 30 years. 6.2% rise in the cost of living. A lot of that's down to your energy bills, your petrol price, average petrol price now, £1.65 a litre at the pumps. And the question is for Rishi Sunak, what's he going to do to help households with that cost of living? And also, what's he going to do about economic growth? Because that hasn't been looking particularly great recently. Of course, you had... This is a chart going back to the financial crisis. You can see a dip there. But look at this great big bungee jump the economy's done over here. And that's the pandemic, when economic activity was artificially suppressed and then it comes back up as the global economy reopens. That means there's extra demand and supply isn't meeting that demand. That's why prices are taking off. And now look here, though, we're going to slow right down according to this chart. And that means that there'll be less money eventually coming into the Treasury than might have been the case if it had had faster growth. But nevertheless, the economy's growing quite quickly at the moment compared to what it has in the past 2 years, certainly in 2020. Then you look at what's happening to borrowing, because borrowing and how much the government has to borrow to plug the gap between its income and its spending depends on how fast the economy is growing. And you look here, it was more than £300 billion during the full lockdown of 2020. That's how much the government had to borrow to, for example, pay people's wages and pay higher benefits. And look how quickly that's come down. It's nearly halved. That's not because of any austerity measures. That's just simply because the economy is growing more quickly. That means more tax money coming into the Treasury. And it's projected to get down to a much more manageable size in the coming months. One of the things that's actually helping is inflation, because, for example, the tax thresholds have been frozen, and that means that more people are paying higher rates of tax. That means more money for the Treasury as well. So what might the measures be in the spring statement that Rishi Sunak might bring in? Well, one of the things the Treasury's already done, it says, to help with the cost of living is the energy bills rebate. So it's looking at £9.1 billion, the government says it's giving in order to help people with those soaring energy bills, which unfortunately are going to jump again come the autumn because of what's been going on recently on the world stage. Then national insurance, we've got the national living wage, they're saying, has gone up to £9.50, or is going to go up to £9.50. Now, the thing with that is that's about a 6% rise, but the Bank of England's saying that inflation could get up to 8% or more. So will that keep up? It's not obvious. And he could also do something with the national insurance threshold. So at the moment, you pay national insurance when you earn more than £9,880. What he could do is to try to cushion people from the higher national insurance they're going to have to pay from the health and social care levy next month. He could raise those thresholds from 9,880 to 11 grand, 12 grand, and that would take a lot of the people who are really hurting out of the net for the higher taxes. Lewis.
Andy, thanks for that. Some of those numbers pretty sobering, and by 12:30ish we'll know if any of those measures are introduced by the Chancellor. Thank you. Right, let's take a look at the impact of those numbers now in the real world. Those in the hospitality industry, rising costs are making it difficult for many to keep afloat. Rising energy costs, COVID, the impact of Brexit. One business person who's been speaking to us says the current situation's created a perfect storm. Well, we can talk now to Jenny Kumar, who's at a laundry business in Axminster in Devon. Hi, Jenny. So what's the impact there?
Well, this business only started in May in the midst of the pandemic. They had a really strong start. They spotted a gap in the market due to the unavailability of workers. And yeah, they did really well, so much so that they invested around £50,000 in new equipment, new machines, new washing machines, new dryers, new irons. But now they're seeing that, being such an energy intensive business, that they're being really impacted by the increase in fuel and in electricity. Now, Ava McFarlane is the owner and director here. Just talk us through the impact this is having on your business.
So obviously we're going to see a reduction in our profits, which is, part of making a business work. Our main outgoings are electricity from our machines and fuel costs for our vehicles. We have introduced a charge now for delivery, which is what we didn't do before, but to try and compensate for the greater increase in fuel is something we've had to bring in. But thankfully our customers have been understanding and supportive of a small charge at the moment.
So speculation is that we may see a cut on fuel duty. What kind of things are you hoping to hear today?
Well, a cut would obviously benefit us. We knew there were going to be increases after the pandemic, but being, so intense and so soon after was maybe not as expected. We forecasted in an increase in our electric of about 30 to 40% rise, but we're just having to ride it out as best we can and, make cuts and be more efficient with deliveries and reduce the deliveries to try and save. But I'm not sure what cuts really are going to come in today. As you say, a small deduction maybe in fuel, which is not really going to impact us, yes.
And I guess the flip side is if the government does decide to cut things like the amount of tax it's getting in, that may mean cuts to other services or reductions in other areas. What do you think should be the priority?
Definitely the working class, the poorer side, you know, they're really going to suffer. We already see poverty in certain areas, and that is a big worry, trying to support the lower income families. You know, they're already struggling. We already see a large amount of people going to food banks. Yeah.
That's great, Ava. Thank you for talking to us. And let's speak to one of your workers here. How are you finding things in terms of your household budget? You've got 2 children, I understand. Your husband works full-time and you've increased your hours.
Yes, I've had to build up my hours a little bit more because electric and gas is going up, fuel's going up, food's going up. It's a lot to take in, a lot of it. You know, I can't do all of it. Some weeks I'm having to decide on whether I have electric or I have food. You know, I have to work more hours just to budget what I can.
And how do you feel about that? I mean, both your husbands are working, trying your best, but you're still struggling.
Yeah, it is a struggle. All of it's a struggle. Yeah, a lot of it is a struggle on a weekly basis. Yeah.
And in terms of, we're hoping to hear from the Chancellor later today about what he might be able to offer families like yours. What should be the priority in your opinion?
Working class people, I think, because we don't get a lot of help like a benefit people do, or, you know, people on benefits, for instance, they get childcare. You know, working class people, we don't get the help with childcare. I have to ask for friends and family to help me out because, you know, it's a fortune for childcare as it is for working class people. It's a lot of hard work.
Okay, great. Thank you for talking to us,
problem.
Louise. Thank you. Nice to hear from you. So that's the picture here in East Devon, and all eyes, all ears, waiting to hear what the government will be offering this afternoon, to help people.
OK, thanks for that, Jenny. Yeah, real insight there into some of the challenges people are going through. Right, we can speak to Chris Keane, who runs a bouncy castle service with a play centre and hireable inflatables. He joins us from his office in Huntington. Thanks very much for coming on the programme.
Good morning.
So that is, first of all, that is an absolutely magnificent backdrop for any interview. It looks like a really fun business and a fun place to work. However, what is anything but fun at the moment is the rising costs that you're having to go through. Can you just talk us through those?
So we've come through, obviously, Brexit, COVID, and now we've got this fuel crisis. Price of gas and electricity to run a centre like this nearly doubled. We don't have the caps you see on domestic bills. So we've seen rises immediately from January and February. For me, it's a perfect storm now. As a hospitality business during COVID, we were the first to be closed down. We were the last to be opened up. From the 1st of April, hospitality VAT is going. So we go back from 12.5% to 20%. Business rates are coming back on again as hospitality. We had some benefits in terms of that. That's coming back in. Wage increases, and obviously, like everybody else, all supplies that we use within the centre for food and beverage are all increasing at the same time. So it is literally a perfect storm. Everything seems to be going up at the same time.
And what about the costs for electricity? Give us some of the numbers.
Well, we were paying back in November, December, about £1,700 a month in electricity. The last month's bill went up to about just under £4,000. So we're talking big jumps in the cost of electricity for a place like this. We rely heavily on electricity, and we're having to find different ways of doing things now.
Chris, I've just been writing down, as you've been talking, that list of costs from electricity, as you just mentioned, the food and drink, wages, rates, VAT. It's an extraordinary list that you're having to deal with. What kind of help would you hope for now?
It's everything hitting together. So really what we're looking for is, in the hospitality, I think we're not ready. We're not really ready for the VAT increases and all the rates to come back on. So anything that can be extended on that would be greatly appreciated. For me, also, it is support for families because we rely heavily on it. The very nature of our product is we need families to come in. If they get squeezed too tight, we then lose our revenue. The cost to run a centre like this is the same whether we have 50 people in the door or 200 people in the door. So we need to try and keep the numbers up. And if families get hit, that will also have an impact on our incomes.
And do you think you will be able to ride this out, and for how long for?
Well, we've already had to cut the non-profitable days. So Monday, Tuesdays, but this week we stopped opening because the costs outstripped the income. We've cut some time back on some of our full-time staff. We've already put a 20% price increase in, which we've had to do in order to cover the bills. So we put everything we can in place to try to facilitate it. We've got through what's been a difficult 3 years, and I don't see really any, it's considered continuing to be challenging, but we're doing everything we can to make sure that we're in a good place that'll continue.
OK, Chris Keane, good luck with everything, and thank you for talking to us.
Thank you.
Right, we will leave the spring statement there for the moment, but we'll come back to it, of course, as soon as we get any more lines out of Westminster on it. Right, let's look at some other news now. The Taliban has reversed a decision to allow most teenage girls in Afghanistan to return to secondary school. They were due back in lessons today for the first time since August last year. Officials say a decision is yet to be made about what uniform the students should wear. Some girls were in class when the announcement was made. The confusion left some in tears as parents and students react with anger and disappointment to the last-minute move. The Ministry of Education said girls' high schools will remain closed until a plan was drawn up in accordance with Islamic law. Well, from Kabul, Sukunda Kamani reports.
Since the Taliban takeover last August, all girls' primary schools and all boys' schools for both younger and older boys have been open, but in most of the country, girls' secondary schools had remained closed. Today's the start of the new academic year in most of the country, and the Taliban had announced that all schools would be reopened, including, we understood, and it was expected, girls' high schools. We went to a girls' high school this morning in the west of Kabul. Teachers were there, students had turned up, but around an hour after school was meant to start, news began filtering through from local Taliban officials that actually girls' high schools, girls' secondary schools weren't going to be allowed to remain open. And that was hugely distressing for the students who were there. Some of them burst out into tears earlier. They'd been telling me how excited, how happy they had been just to be back in the classroom. Many feared that perhaps that they would never have been allowed back in the classroom. And that's because back under the Taliban's rule in the 1990s, girls' education was more or less completely banned. It had seemed that it was going to be different this time, but this unexpected, rather bizarre last-minute U-turn has really been deeply unsettling for many Afghans, and it's taken more or less the entire country by surprise, including parts of the Taliban. The Taliban's own Ministry of Education say that they received a note from the central leadership saying that the plan for the reopening of girls' high schools would have to be halted until a new, more Islamic, more comprehensive plan had been drawn up. It's not clear when, if ever, that will be. But one statement by a government, official government news agency did mention concern about school uniforms. I mean, frankly speaking, it's not clear what that could be a reference to or what any of the so-called Islamic concerns could be, because girls' schools and boys' schools in Afghanistan were already segregated by gender. Under this new Taliban proposal that we had been expecting to be implemented today, girls would only be taught by female teachers, boys would only be taught by male teachers. Girls, as part of their uniform, already wear the hijab, the covering of their hair. So it's really not clear what the issue is here. And I suspect this is because for hardline elements within the Taliban, female education is such a sensitive, such a controversial issue that they really haven't been able to reconcile themselves to the idea of girls, of older girls going back to school. And that really just shows how out of touch they are with the modern aspirations of Afghan society. And it reveals how divided, certainly on this issue at least, the Taliban appear to be.
Thanks to Sukunda there. Now, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge have arrived in Jamaica for the second leg of their week-long Caribbean tour. Activists there have been calling on the UK to pay reparations for slavery, an issue Prince William is expected to address in a speech later. The couple began their visit in the centre of the capital, Kingston, a warning that this report from our royal correspondent Johnny Diamond contains flash photography.
A rather formal start to what would become a pretty informal day. Just before their arrival, a demonstration outside Britain's High Commission, its embassy to Jamaica. a protest against Britain's use of slaves here when Jamaica was its colony, and a demand for financial compensation.
It is an insult to us for these young people to be here to try to persuade us to keep the status quo in place when our goal is to loosen and remove the hands, the gloved hands of the Queen from around our necks.
Prince William is expected to discuss slavery in the same sort of frank terms that his father, Prince Charles, used recently in Barbados. He talked about it being a stain on history.
But that will come later. First, there was a visit to downtown Kingston. The crowds were waiting. The royals can still pull a crowd in Jamaica. And they pull celebrities too. Manchester City's Raheem Sterling and Aston Villa's Leon Bailey, a Jamaican international. Then it was down to business, with Williams setting up a goal for Raheem Sterling. But it was the couple's off-pitch walkabout that sent the crowd wild. Down the street they swept, surrounded by a cheering throng. And then into one of Jamaica's cultural shrines, the place where Bob Marley once lived and hung out with other musicians. This was a musical celebration. And a chance to kick back and relax. The royals got stuck in and the beat went on. Here was a couple enjoying life together. All good things come to an end. Eventually, they said their goodbyes.
Thank you so much.
Trenchtown will remember their visit for a long time to come. Johnny Diamond, BBC News, Kingston, Jamaica.
Now it's time for a look at the weather with Carol. Carol, lovely picture behind you. Is the weather as lovely?
It is indeed, Lewis. Yes, for many of us, it's going to be very similar to this today. But if you're just about to go out for the first time, you'll notice that in Braemar, it's rather cold still, only 3 degrees. Hull, 6, Armagh, Northern Ireland, 8. But for Aberporth, Prestwick and High Wycombe, temperatures are rising quite nicely now. We're looking at 12 degrees. High pressure is still firmly in charge, and it's a huge area of high pressure covering much of Europe. And from the distinct lack of isobars, you can tell that we're only looking at gentle breezes today. So in the warm sunshine, it will feel rather pleasant. We've still got some remnants of this morning's fog across the northeast of England and the East Midlands. That will lift, and then most of us enjoying a dry day with a lot of sunshine. Once again, there's a risk of a shower across eastern Scotland, eastern England, and also across parts of the Western Isles, where it could be quite sharp later on. Temperatures 9 to about 19 degrees, possibly 21 across parts of East Anglia and the southeast through the afternoon. So as we head on through the evening and overnight, under clear skies, the temperature will fall away quite quickly. We'll have some patchy mist and fog forming as well. And then we've got all this cloud coming in across Northern Ireland and Western Scotland with 1 or 2 showers. These are our overnight lows, so between 1 and 6 or 7 degrees. But in the countryside, they could fall away lower than this, so there could once again be a touch of frost first thing. But a lot of dry weather again tomorrow. Once again, we'll have a weather front coming in, or trying to come in from the west, introducing a bit more cloud, the odd shower, not much more than that. Bright across eastern parts of Northern Ireland and also eastern Scotland. And also we're looking at a bit more cloud at times across Northern England and Wales, but it's fair weather cloud, so not spoiling anything. Temperatures 9 to about 18 degrees, but cooler along the coastlines. Now, as we head into Friday, still a lot of dry weather, a bit more cloud though coming in across Northern Ireland and Scotland, slowly slipping southwards, and we could see some low cloud lapping on shore and lingering for much of the day across the southeast of England. Temperatures 9 to about 19 degrees. And that leads us into the weekend. High pressure still firmly in charge of our weather, but we do have this weather front trying to make inroads, but it's going to produce more in the way of cloud. So into the weekend, temperatures will slip a little bit, but they'll go down further, especially next Tuesday and Wednesday.